Imagine you live in a city, not a village, a city. 46,000 people, streets laid out in concentric rings, central plazas, two-story homes made of timber and clay. A population larger than anything in the ancient world at that moment in time. Now imagine that every 60 years, like clockwork, your people gather, and you burn it, all of it. The homes, the storage buildings, the temples, everything. Then you walk away, and you build again, somewhere nearby, and the cycle repeats. This isn't myth, this isn't speculation. Archaeologists have found the ash layers. Geomagnetic surveys have mapped the concentric streets under the ground. Radiocarbon dating has confirmed the timing. Someone built cities larger than Rome, over 2,000 years before Rome existed, and then they deliberately burned them, over and over and over again. Nobody knows why. And that's just where this story begins. Somewhere in every history education, there's a moment where they show you the ancient world. Egypt, Mesopotamia, Greece, Rome, the same four civilizations, shown in the same sequence, treated as the origin story of everything that came after. But there's a problem with that picture. It leaves out an entire civilization, one that existed for nearly 3,000 years, stretched across an area the size of France, and built cities that no other culture on Earth could match at the time. The Cucuteni-Trypillia. If you've never heard that name before, you're not alone. Most people haven't, and when you find out why, it becomes one of the more uncomfortable questions in the history of archaeology. Let's go back. A long way back. The year is approximately 4,500 BC. The place is the fertile steppe forest zone of what is now Ukraine, Moldova, and Romania. The last ice age ended roughly 6,000 years before this moment. Agriculture has arrived in Europe, and something unusual is beginning to happen in this specific corner of the continent. People are gathering. Not in small villages, in planned, organized, deliberately designed settlements. The houses are 2 stories tall. The walls are made from a timber frame, plastered with clay, then painted. Inside, each home follows nearly the same layout: a sleeping area, a workspace, and a ritual area containing a clay oven and ceramic figurines, mostly female, placed with obvious care. The pottery alone is extraordinary. Vessels decorated with intricate spiral patterns, black and red on cream, with a geometric precision that doesn't look like the work of people who had just discovered the wheel. It looks like a mature artistic tradition, a recognizable aesthetic, a cultural identity expressed in clay, and the scale of it keeps growing. By 4,200 BC, settlements of 1,000 houses appear. By 3,800 BC, the mega-sites emerge: Maidanetske, Talianki, Nebelivka, Dobrovody. Maidanetske alone covered over 200 hectares. Talianki may have reached 320. When University of Kiel archaeologists ran geomagnetic surveys over these sites in the 2000s and 2010s, what appeared under the soil was not what anyone expected. Concentric rings of houses, radial streets connecting ring to ring, like spokes on a wheel, central open plazas, large assembly buildings, public architecture placed at regular intervals. These weren't accidental agglomerations of people. These were planned cities, with a coherent urban logic that took centuries to develop. And the people who built them lived in a way that continues to puzzle archaeologists today. There was no palace, no temple district, no royal quarter. Research published in 2024 inches the journal Antiquity, analyzing the size of 7,000 houses across 38 settlements, found almost no variation in household size. The Gini coefficient, the standard measure of inequality, was consistently near zero. In a city of 15,000 people, roughly the size of a large modern town, there appears to have been no ruling class, no king, no bureaucracy, no army that archaeology can find. How do you run a city of 15,000 people with no government? That question doesn't have a clean answer, but we'll come back to it, because first we need to talk about what happened to those cities. Here is a fact about these cities that has no parallel in the ancient world. Every 60 to 80 years, not because of war, not because of fire spreading by accident, not because of plague, the inhabitants of a Cucuteni-Trypillia settlement would set their city on fire. Deliberately, systematically, building by building. The evidence for this is not ambiguous. Serbian archaeologist Mirjana Stevanovic spent years analyzing the burn patterns at these sites. Her conclusion: the structures were destroyed by deliberate burning, most likely for reasons of symbolic nature. The fires burned hot, extremely hot, hot enough to vitrify the clay walls, to turn them, essentially, into ceramic. This required enormous amounts of fuel, far more than an accidental fire would produce. Someone stacked wood against the structures. Someone lit them. Across the entire 3,000-year span of this culture, from Romania to Ukraine, archaeologists have found this pattern repeated at site after site. The burned house horizon, academics call it a term coined by archaeologist Ruth Tringham to describe the broad region of Neolithic Eastern Europe where this practice appears. But the question that has haunted researchers for decades that still has no definitive answer is, why? 3 theories have accumulated the most evidence. The first: it was a funerary practice. When someone important died, a household elder, a matriarch, a communal leader, the home where they lived was burned as their tomb. The objects they owned burned with them, their ashes scattered, no grave to mark, no body to find, just fire. This theory gains some support from a discovery in 2024 when archaeologists excavating the site of Kosanivka found the remains of 7 individuals inside a burned house, likely a family. It was one of the only times human remains had been found in context with a burned structure. The second theory: it was ritual purification. The burning ended the spiritual life of a settlement, a controlled death, so that the community could be reborn somewhere new, not destruction. Transformation. Fire as the mechanism of renewal. The third theory, and the one that some researchers find most disturbing, is that the burning was a social technology, a mechanism for preventing the accumulation of wealth and power. If every generation burns what the previous generation built, no single family can inherit enough to dominate the rest. Fire as enforced equality. Which theory is correct? Probably all 3, in different proportions at different times. But the burning is only the first mystery. Here's the second, and this one is harder to explain. 15,000 people lived in Talianki for multiple generations. That means births, deaths, infants, elders, people who died from accidents, from illness, from old age. In a comparable Greek or Roman city, we'd expect cemeteries, burial mounds, marked graves, sarcophagi, the physical evidence of how a society treats its dead. We have found almost none of that. A 2024 paper noted that one of the defining features of the Cucuteni-Trypillia culture is the near-total absence of human remains corresponding to the populations who lived in these places. UNESCO's official designation describing the civilization for World Heritage candidacy confirms it. There are no necropolises. Where did they go? The most widely held theory today is also the most poetic. When a person died, their home was burned, their body was cremated in or near that fire, and their ashes, instead of being placed in an urn, instead of being buried in a marked grave, were scattered into the fields, into the rivers, returned to the landscape they had farmed their entire lives. No monument, no marker, no inheritance of remains. The UNESCO document states it with unusual directness. The deceased were probably cremated and their ashes scattered in fields and on water as an expression of human communion with nature. Think about what that means. This civilization deliberately left no record of its individual dead, no way to say, "My ancestor lies here," no way to inherit status from a named ancestor in a marked grave. The land didn't belong to any family. It didn't belong to any dynasty. It belonged to everyone who had ever been scattered into it. And yet, there are a few rare findings that complicate this picture. UNESCO also notes that very few contexts do contain human remains, and some show evidence of trepanation, skull cults, and practices that some researchers have cautiously translated as ritual anthropophagy. Let that sit for a moment. We don't fully understand what these practices meant within their belief system. We don't have a text that explains them. We have the physical evidence, and we have silence, which may be the most honest thing we can say about any aspect of this civilization. We have the objects, we don't have the words. Let's return to the question we left unanswered earlier. How do you run a city of 15,000 people with no government? The 2024 research from the University of Kiel offers a partial answer, and it's one that feels almost uncomfortable to read in the current moment. The near-zero Gini coefficient across the settlement data suggests that the Cucuteni-Trypillia megasites operated on a principle of active participation, what the researchers called something close to a reformist character that enabled ordinary people to take part in political decision-making. The assembly buildings found at regular intervals around the cities weren't palaces, they were meeting places. The archaeological evidence points to communal feasting deposits, bones, pottery, evidence of large-scale food preparation suggesting regular gatherings of the entire population. This wasn't utopia. There were tensions. Evidence of violence exists. The enclosure walls surrounding some settlements suggest they weren't naive about external threats. But the city functioned for centuries. And it functioned without the hierarchical structure that we typically assume is required for civilization to work. There's one more dimension to this that matters. The Cucuteni-Trypillia was also, by all available evidence, a matrilineal society. Women headed households. Women managed agriculture and ceramic production, the two most economically significant activities in the settlement. The female figurines found across thousands of sites are not fertility symbols placed by men. They are expressions of female identity placed by the women who made them. We don't know what this society called itself. We don't know what language they spoke. We don't know the names of a single person who lived there. But we know what they built, and we know what they chose to burn. And around 3200 BC, something started to change. The end of the Cucuteni-Trypillia didn't happen in a day. It happened over centuries, and that, in some ways, makes it harder to understand. Around 3200 BC, the exact year the Earth's climate entered a cooling and drying period now known to climatologists as the Blitz-Sernander subboreal phase, the first signs of stress appear. The megasites begin to shrink, populations fragment, the large assembly buildings become rarer. The characteristic painted pottery, that intricate spiral-decorated ceramic that had defined the culture for 2,000 years, begins to simplify. At the same time, something is moving in from the east. From the Pontic-Caspian steppe, the vast flat grasslands east of the Trypillia territory, a new cultural group is expanding westward, the Yamnaya. Horse riders, pastoralists, a culture built around mobility rather than permanence, burial mounds rather than burned cities, individual grave goods that mark personal wealth and individual identity. For decades, the standard interpretation was violent Marija Gimbutas, the influential archaeologist who named the old European cultures, argued that the Kurgan peoples essentially destroyed the egalitarian world of the Trypillia. Conquest, replacement, end. But the most recent archaeology complicates that story significantly. A paper published in 2025 Inches, the journal Quaternary International, offers what may be the most nuanced reading of the Trypillia collapse yet. The researchers argue that what ended the Cucuteni-Trypillia wasn't conquest, it was competition for meaning. Think about what the Yamnaya offered, that the Trypillia system didn't. A marked grave, a burial mound visible on the horizon, a way to say, my ancestor lies here. This land belongs to our family. Your name outlasts your body. The Trypillia had deliberately built a world without that. No inheritance of remains. No ancestral land claim. No individual monument. That's a coherent worldview, but it's not the only one available. And when the climate deteriorated, when the harvests began to fail, when the old communal certainties started to crack at the edges, the steppe burial tradition offered something the burning ritual couldn't: permanence. Individual permanence. The conclusion of that 2025 analysis is striking. The Cucuteni-Trypillia didn't collapse into nothing, they transformed. Their material culture became minimal. Their cities dissolved into smaller mobile groups, and over time, their descendants merged with the incoming steppe populations, which means the Cucuteni-Trypillia didn't die, they became someone else. Geneticists studying ancient DNA from this region have found Trypillia-related ancestry contributing to the populations of Bronze Age Europe, a culture that built no individual monuments, kept no written records, left no named ancestors, nonetheless sent something forward through the generations. Some of that ancestry, in some small measure, may be present in the people watching this right now. In 1884, A Romanian archaeologist named Teodor Barada noticed some pottery fragments mixed into gravel at a road near the village of Cucuteni. He investigated. He found ceramics and terracotta figures. He didn't know, at that moment, that he was standing at the edge of the largest forgotten civilization in prehistoric Europe. 140 years later, we still don't know their name for themselves. We don't know what language they spoke. We don't know what their gods looked like, or what they called the world. We know they built enormous cities and burned them. We know they scattered their dead into the fields. We know they lived for 2,700 years in near total equality, a run longer than from the fall of Rome to now. And then they chose, or were forced, or both, to become something else. There's a question buried in this story that feels uncomfortably current. What happens to a society that deliberately refuses to let any individual accumulate more than their neighbors? That burns the evidence of the past rather than building monuments to it. That returns its dead to the earth rather than naming them? Does it survive? Does it thrive? Does it lose to cultures that offer something it can't, the permanence of a marked name in the ground? The Cucuteni-Trypillia didn't answer that question cleanly, but they ran the experiment for 3 millennia. And somewhere under the black soil of Ukraine and Romania and Moldova, the ash of their cities is still there, mixed into the earth, part of it, now, permanently. If you want to go further, the next video on this channel covers a civilization even older than this one. A people who built the world's first true cities in a desert long before Egypt or Mesopotamia claimed the title. It's the story the textbook skipped, and it starts the same way every story in this niche does, with something buried, waiting.